Kia ora tātou. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a todos y todas. I'm Matthew Omar, the Director of the Latin America Cape, together with the Ambassador of Argentina, Her Excellency Maria Belén Bogado, and Professor Tim Naish, representing the Antarctic Research Centre here at Te Heringawaka, Victoria University of Wellington. It's my great pleasure and honour to welcome you all tonight. It's great to see so many of you with us for this really lovely occasion. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of some of our dignitaries this evening. We have, as well as obviously the Ambassador of Argentina and the previous Ambassador of Argentina, we have the Ambassadors of Brazil, Cuba, Peru, Japan, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates and Egypt. We have the President of the International Science Council, Distinguished Professor Sir Peter Gluckman. We have former New Zealand Minister of Climate Change and Trade, normally I say it the other way around, the Honourable Tim Grosser. We have the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research of our host university, Professor Margaret Hyland. Welcome, Margaret. We have several distinguished professors from Victoria University of Wellington, David Cappy, James Rennick, Catherine Owens, and Rob Revell. From the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, we have Kareem Dickey and Angus Middleton. And we also have other representatives from other other embassies here and New Zealand government officials. In short, a really distinguished audience, and actually a really mixed audience. We have, as well as dignitaries, we have members of the public, we have people who are scientists, we have people who love international relations, and people who just love the planet. And we're all gathered here to celebrate a major milestone in a special way. The milestone is, of course, the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between New Zealand and Argentina. And I'd be very disappointed if you didn't notice that I've dressed up in Argentine colours for the show. We thought we'd honour the occasion best in this capital city by focusing on a theme, a sort of a foreign policy theme with some science at the core, a theme that is of interest to both countries, and that is, of course, Antarctica. So with the support of the Antarctic Research Centre here at our university, and the great work of the teams in all three entities, which I'm really grateful for, the plans have come to fruition. And over the next hour, we hope to celebrate bilateral friendships and our planet in style. But how did the theme come about? Well, back in April, the Cape and Universities New Zealand collaborated in taking a delegation of research leaders from all New Zealand universities to Latin America. And when we visited Argentina, it was a subject of conversation, two of the conversations we had in Buenos Aires. So we thought when we came back from that very successful mission, that an event on an Antarctic theme, science and multilateral diplomacy, could be a way to draw attention not just to the theme itself, but to the wider fact that New Zealand researchers, Argentine researchers, and indeed researchers from many Latin American nations have interests in common, and they could develop those relationships further. So, as many of you, but perhaps not all of you will know, our Cape, our centre, is in its last days. So we really wanted to use that time to get that message across, that there is real value for our society and our institutions to be had in engaging more with Latin American counterparts on themes of common interest. So we'll be seeing precisely tonight how many of those themes there are. But before we get into that subject, we must first honour the anniversary of diplomatic relations appropriately. So it is now my honour to invite the Ambassador of Argentina to the podium to make some remarks on bilateral relations and then to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Enamana, Enareo, Enaiwi, Tenakoto, Tenakoto, Tenatato Katoa. Dear representatives of the New Zealand government, members of the parliament, ambassadors, my colleagues, other colleagues from our diplomatic corps family, representatives of Victoria University, Auckland University, University of Canterbury, and Massey University. Dear friends of Argentina in Aotearoa New Zealand, and I should say dear friends of Fausto in Aotearoa New Zealand, queridos compatriotas, Naumai Haremai, Naumai Haremai, Haremai Ra. Bienvenidos, welcome everyone. Tonight, as Matthew said, is a very special night for us. We have an incredible panel as part of a series of activities organized under the celebration of our 60th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between Argentina and Aotearoa New Zealand. Before moving on, I would like to thank the Antarctic Research Center, especially Robert, Barbara, I don't see Barbara, and Dao. Obviously, our dear friends from LATAM Cape, Matthew, Craig, Jorge, Victoria University for hosting us, and the Argentinian Antarctic Institute that provided the photos that you can see upstairs, and a special thank to my team, especially to Carolina, for their endless support organizing this incredible event and exhibition. As a big surprise, you will also have the opportunity to enjoy a finest selection of photos and tools used in the White Continent. Those artifacts are displayed in the mezzanine, and we will enjoy that during the cocktail we will have after this interesting discussion. As we said, tonight's panel is part of a program to celebrate 60 years of friendship and strong diplomatic relations with Aotearoa New Zealand. This 2024 brings to light the strong cooperation ties between our Southern Hemisphere countries and our peoples at a bilateral and at the multilateral level. Argentina and Aotearoa New Zealand have meaningful shared values in the international realm. Both countries are committed to international peace and security and to the protection of democracy and human rights. We are similarly committed to addressing global challenges, such as non-proliferation of weapons and climate change, and to playing a positive role towards mutual understanding between nations to find so needed peaceful solutions to conflicts. As your Deputy Prime Minister Peter said recently, diplomacy is more needed than ever. Being Antarctic nations, Argentina and New Zealand have similar government policies, strategies, and perspectives regarding Antarctica. We share many concerns and responsibilities in that part of our Southern Hemisphere. We feel really fortunate to rely on Aotearoa New Zealand as a key partner on these matters. Nowadays, when the international context is facing significant disruption and complexity, a strong and lasting partnership like ours do matter. Our incredible panel tonight will address both countries' scientific cooperation in that region at the multilateral level, and also they will discuss the current challenges in Antarctica. We are really extremely honored to have Minister Fausto Lopez Crozet with us tonight. He will be our keynote speaker. Thank you very much, Fausto, for returning to this beautiful country that we all know you love so much, and becoming part of a celebration of our anniversary with your very timely presentation. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a very timely presentation. We are also honored to have Professor Tim Naish, Alice Revell from MFAT, and Dr. Gabriela Roldan from Canterbury University participating in this amazing panel. Thank you all for being with us tonight and giving your important insights on this very, very key topic. In conclusion, I believe this panel discussion will provide valuable insights into the strategic outlooks of Argentina and New Zealand. We are celebrating our bilateral friendship. It's a bilateral and unique opportunity for both countries to further strengthen cooperation and exchanges. And as I said, in an increasingly polarized and contested world, partnership and cooperation matter. I would like to finish with this Maori proverb that reminds me a part of Martín Fierro, a very famous literary piece in Argentina, a very timely proverb. Kia urupu tatou, kaua e tauku mekume. Let's be united, not pulling against one another. Thank you for coming tonight. Muchas gracias, Nami Hinui. Let's enjoy the discussion and the celebration. Happy anniversary for Argentina and Aotearoa New Zealand. As I said, we have the great pleasure of having Minister, I would say ambassador, because minister is our rank in the ministry, but I would say ambassador, Fausto Lopez Crozet with us tonight, my dear predecessor. Ambassador Lopez Crozet is currently serving as National Director of Antarctic Foreign Policy in our Foreign Affairs Ministry. He's a career diplomat. He's a lawyer from Universidad de La Plata. He doesn't need much presentation because you all know him, but I would like to highlight that overseas he served as at the Argentine Embassy in the Republic of Uruguay, then in our embassy in Ecuador, and he was the Argentine ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa from 2016 to 2020. Regarding multilateral diplomacy, he was a member of the Argentine delegations to the main Antarctic forums since 1994, including 15 Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings and meetings of the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, acting as head of delegation for both meetings from 2011 until 2016. He is the current head of delegation for both meetings since 2021. That's why we have him here, because he's in a trip to Australia for one of those meetings. Fausto, my dear friend, my dear colleague, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. What a night. Well, can you hear me? It's okay? Yeah. I will start by thanking the Antarctic Research Center, thanks to the Latin America Center of Asia Pacific Excellence, the university, and our ambassador, Belén Bogado, for giving me this opportunity, being back here in New Zealand. It is a great pleasure to return to this country, which was my home for many years. I made many good friends while I had the honor of representing my country as head of mission. Many of them are here. I'm really happy. You may recall that the Antarctic Treaty System comprises a set of rules and international bodies stemming from the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959 and includes Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings, Protocol on Environmental Convention, Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, among others. And Argentina and New Zealand are originally signatories of the Antarctic Treaty and are both deeply committed to the success of the Antarctic Treaty system. We consider that an incredible achievement, and I remark incredible achievement, of this system is having kept for more than 6 decades a whole continent devoted to peace, science, international cooperation, and with an incredible level of environmental protection. So that's nowadays something that is incredible. Having said that, I do recognize that there are challenges in Antarctica, both in the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings and in CAMELAR. However, These current challenges are no more complex than the ones the system has already been able to overcome. For instance, the Antarctic Treaty itself was negotiated and signed in a high-risk Cold War scenario. There were concerns about the possibility of a militarization of Antarctica and about potential nuclear tests to be performed in there. Another significant challenge was the oil crisis in the 1970s. At that moment, some countries explored alternate sources of fossil fuel exploration and exploitation. At that moment, we negotiated a comprehensive framework just in case that should happen. It never happened because we finally adopted the Environmental Protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, whose Article 7 established a total prohibition on mineral activities. Additionally, the overexploitation of fish and krill in Antarctic waters have been efficiently addressed since 1982 by the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. More recently, some concerns have been raised about the difficulties posed by the rule of consensus in the Antarctic Treaty decision-making process. Consensus can sometimes be regarded as producing kind of a lethargic or untimely responses to the critical issues we face today in Antarctica. However, consensus ensures that decisions within the Antarctic Treaty system are supported by all parties. Reaching consensus requires effort, requires time, and negotiating in good faith. Consensus involves a strong sense of cooperation and has contributed to the development of a real negotiation effort and to the creation of a more positive, respectful environment for the implementation of decisions within the Antarctic Treaty system. The rule of consensus has been no obstacle to our capacity to deal with important matters, while at the same time upholding the principle of equality of all members. The success of having maintained Antarctica over the last 60 years as an area devoted to peace, science, international cooperation, and environmental protection is largely due to decision-making by consensus. When faced with these issues, I often remember the proverb, if you want to go fast, travel alone. If you want to go far, travel together. And we have been able to travel quite far together with this principle of consensus. Another important goal of the system is tackling the effects of climate change. We have worked together with New Zealand and other parties on implementing the recommendations of the Committee on Environmental Protection and CAMELAR on monitoring climate change, as well as on assessing the risk of climate change in Antarctica. We have to keep improving the coordination for a better understanding of the effects of climate change in Antarctica and take concrete measures to mitigate its effects on the continent. Nowadays, the Antarctic Treaty is facing a new challenge, which is misinformation. Most common myth about the system, for example, is perhaps the expiration of the treaty or the protocol. In 2048, you will read that everywhere. And the truth is that neither of them have an expiration date. This year, a misinterpretation of a scientific geological study came up as articles in different newspapers stating that oil was discovered in Antarctica. Different governments even had to react to this fake news by publishing press notes or other types of documents. The release of large language models and generative artificial intelligence to the public will probably exacerbate this problem in the future. Some people deposit a great trust in these interactive tools without checking the sources. As these systems are trained with information from the internet, they could start to be fed with wrong information that they previously created or helped to create. So all the actors of the Antarctic Treaty System should be aware of this challenge, work together to mitigate this risk, and avoid the temptation of overreacting to misinformation, mainly taking into account the fast reactions that today are expected, not just from governments, but from communicators too. But let me go back in time a little bit and tell you a brief story. When the negotiation of the Antarctic Treaty started, that was 1959, Argentina, a relatively small country in terms of global power, presented an idea to its counterparts to include a total banning on nuclear activities in Antarctica. Allow me to give a little bit of context. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the race for achieving the best nuclear defense systems was at one of its peaks. 1958, the former Soviet Union deployed the first ever intercontinental ballistic missiles. Same the US in 1959. The records of the negotiations show that when the world powers listened to this proposal, they literally responded with laugh. May I say, when Argentina made this proposal, everybody thought these guys are crazy. We would never get that. Our head of delegation at that moment said, the initial reaction of incredulity and astonishment provoked by the Argentine initiative on nuclear issues gradually gave up and gave way in informal meetings to a reasoned opposition. Probably it was a natural response given the circumstances. In the context of the Cold War, would the main powers restrain themselves voluntarily from using Antarctica as a platform for nuclear missiles or for nuclear tests or for nuclear disposal? Clearly, at the very beginning, the idea was received as a utopia, a naive proposal. So what did Argentina do? We look for partners with the same interest in the Antarctic continent, the countries from the south, knowing that the proximity to Antarctica is a shared reality that would unite us for this cause. So New Zealand, Australia, and Chile were those countries. Let me quote one of the interventions of the New Zealand delegation at that treaty negotiations. The representative of New Zealand said that his delegation would like to see a treaty with some main objectives. One, it should provide a basis for avoiding rivalries and disputes over conflicting territorial rights and national interests in Antarctica. And two, it should ensure that Antarctica remains permanently isolated from the tensions caused by the Cold War and free from war or the threat of war. As you can see from this objective, New Zealand was clearly on the same page as Argentina. So, on that occasion, our countries started to work together for the inclusion of what today is known as the Article 5 of the Antarctic Treaty. These middle power countries had to close ranks and cooperate until the end of the negotiations in order to have an Article 5. Today, we do have an Article 5 that clearly states that any nuclear explosions in Antarctica and the disposal there of radioactive waste materials shall be prohibited. We do have it because of our countries. More than 60 years after that accomplishment, the world is facing the influence of the increase of military conflicts and political tensions in different parts. As we did 60 years ago, the gateway countries to Antarctica should remain united to defend the Antarctic Treaty System, avoiding conflicts which could affect the protection of Antarctica. Based on its tradition of cooperation and its reliable partnership, New Zealand and Argentina have a key role to play. And it's natural that both countries have a similar approach towards Antarctic issues because we are both gateways to Antarctica. Among other things, it means that everything that happens in or related to the White Continent impacts us first and more directly. Just to give some examples of it, the avian influenza, to mention one of the most recent, in which we are working close together, and thank you, Belén, and thank you, Alice, because you are working together, we are working together with your ambassador there, so it's incredible how we can work together with these problems that we are facing now. Another important issue that we are working together, management of tourism in Antarctica, logistic challenges for science operations, search and rescue responsibilities. We both have a huge space of sea in which we have the responsibility of search and rescue. Economic impact for our gateway cities of activities in Antarctica, cultural and historical connection of our countries with Antarctica. For this reason, I am glad that in the last Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, we had a special meeting of the gateway cities. My experience as ambassador to New Zealand showed me that not only do we have the same view on Antarctica, but we also share the same values and similar approaches to many global issues. That is why I am sure that our bilateral relation will continue growing. And as we have been doing for more than 60 years, we will continue working together for a non-politicized, strong and efficient Antarctic system for the sake of Antarctica, for the sake of our countries and for the sake of the world. So let me finish with one question and one invitation. If the Antarctic Treaty was successful in achieving the goals of peace, non-militarization, non-nuclearization, international cooperation and environmental protection in times as uncertain and as complex as in the Cold War, why can't it be used as an example, a model, or an inspiration for other international fora or other international situations that we are facing now? It might sound utopic, but maybe as utopic as our proposal for banning nuclear activity sounded 60 years ago. So the invitation is to keep on working together, trying to make utopia a reality. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister, Ambassador, Fausto, whatever we want to call you, for those challenging yet really hopeful remarks. I'd now like to, let me say it's great to see your presence here is a really rich outcome of our conversation, that coffee we had together in April in Buenos Aires, and it's lovely to see you again here as Ambassador in a city where you spent many happy years as Ambassador. I'd now like to invite the panellists to the front, because we're going to have three other speakers, as has been said, and I'm going to ask each of them, so Tim, Gabriela and Alice, if you could make your way to the front. I'm now going to ask each of you some prepared questions, and then if time permits, some spontaneous ones.
It's on? Yeah.
Okay, normally at this point we read out bios, but we're trying to keep it lively, so rather than me introducing each person, as honoured as we are to have them, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So, well, why don't we go to this way. Gabriela, could you tell us a bit about yourself, briefly, your professional and personal connections to Antarctica and Argentina?
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening, everybody. Buenas noches. My name is Gabriela Roldan, or in Argentina will be Gabriela Roldan. But I have been in New Zealand for many, many years, so I understand the difficulties of the accent. I am a social scientist, and I work at the University of Canterbury. My area of interest with Antarctica is the Antarctic gateway cities and how humans connect with Antarctica. How do we see Antarctica from the periphery? How is Antarctica portrayed by countries that have interest, geopolitical, economic, and of course, scientific interest in Antarctica? Why am I interested in Antarctica? Well, I come from a very small town at the very, very south of South America called Ushuaia. And it's in Tierra del Fuego. And in Tierra del Fuego, we look south instead of looking north, like everybody else in Argentina. Patagonia is an extensive country that we share with Chile. And in Ushuaia, we are affected by the Antarctic, the closest neighbor. So having moved to New Zealand, I had the opportunity to do a PhD at the University of Canterbury. So in a way, I feel a little bit the imposter syndrome here because I am a mature early career scientist in the presence of this fantastic panel. So thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. Tim.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, koutou everyone. So Tim Naish, I'm a professor at Hiringawaka, Victoria University. I work in the Antarctic Research Centre. I used to be the director of the Antarctic Research Centre for about 10 years, but that's been handed over to Rob Mackay, who I'm really stepping in here for tonight as he is over in France. So I'm a climate scientist. I've spent most of my life worrying about what the polar ice sheets have done in the past, are sort of doing now and will do in the future. And I'm really interested also in what that means for global climate and particularly sea level rise. And so that's sort of my passion at the moment. I'm really very focused on what's happening right now. How is the Antarctic ice sheet responding to climate change and what might it do in the future and what does that sort of mean for us? So I've had 16 expeditions down to Antarctica, mostly scientific. In the last few years, I've been on tourist ships out of Ushuaia and Punta Arenas giving lectures. So that's a very different way of experiencing and seeing Antarctica. My scientific leadership, which I think is relevant to this discussion, is I'm quite heavily involved in the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. I lead one of the major research programs in there. We collaborate with 41 countries in that program, got 360 participants. We have a leader in our steering group, which is Meca Santos from Argentina. She's an ocean conservation person, very experienced in Camelar. There's quite a diversity of nations and disciplines in this research group. So, yeah, I've had the privilege to go to treaty meetings, and I was at the Helsinki Antarctic Treaty meeting where work we had been involved in on how the region is responding to climate change and how the environment is changing led to a declaration signed by all parties of the Antarctic Treaty, and that was the Helsinki Declaration. So it was a pretty cool thing to see that science being transferred into policy words in a meaningful statement like that. So I'll leave it there and hand over to Alice.
Is that working now? Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Matthew and the organisers for inviting us. in addition to my current role as the head of the Antarctic part of our foreign ministry, I think my connection to Antarctica really started a couple of decades ago when I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and my very first role out of university was in the Antarctic Policy Unit. And so I went to my first Antarctic Treaty meeting in Cape Town in 2004, and that's the first of 5 ATCMs that I have been to. The most recent one was this year, and I've also during that journey been to 4 Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources meetings, and I'm about to go to my 5th one this weekend with Fausto. And I've played a couple of different roles, I guess, in New Zealand's Antarctic work over those years. In the beginning in Antarctic policy, I remember being in Stockholm when the Antarctic Liability Annex was adopted, which was a very exciting moment for a young international lawyer. Then I also later on was the lawyer in the New Zealand delegations and legal advisor on Antarctic issues, and now I'm the head of those delegations. So it's interesting to reflect on how the world has got quite a lot more complex in many ways in those times as climate change has become a present challenge and not only a future one for the continent and for all of us as a planet. And also, I think that as Fausto mentioned in his very eloquent speech, geopolitical times have got more complex as well. But as he said, there's nothing that that's before us now that is harder than the things we have faced before. I completely agree with that. In fact, I could have made exactly the same speech, which I think just goes to show how much we have in common. I had one opportunity to visit Antarctica. Unlike scientists, us diplomats don't get so many opportunities to go to Antarctica. But in 2009, when I was working on Antarctic legal issues, I was able to travel to Antarctica on one of the Defence Force flights doing surveillance in the Southern Ocean looking for potential illegal fishing vessels. And we did indeed spot some, and the Defence Force pilots zoomed down and spoke to them and warned them that they were not complying with the rules, and they looked very scared and got out of there very quickly, and we then reported that, of course, to the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources and to the flag state of the vessels as well. We then flew further down to Scott Base, New Zealand's Antarctic Research Station in the Ross Sea, and stayed the night there for one night and then came back to New Zealand the next day. So that was my brief experience on the continent itself. But I know there are many others here who have had a lot more experience on that continent than I have. So that's my connection to Antarctica. My connection to Argentina is mostly just as a friend. I haven't yet had the chance to visit.
Well, you need to put that right, Alice. But we'll give a little bit of taste of Argentina and the networking afterwards. Now, but before we talk about networking, we've got to ask you some hard questions. Well, they're actually not that hard questions. You've seen them in advance. So, Alice, well, let's start with you. We heard Fausto giving an Argentine perspective on some of the issues of our time. And as you said, you could have given the same speech. But could you just highlight for everyone in the room 2 or 3 examples of where New Zealand and Argentina are collaborating closely in matters relating to the Antarctic Treaty System?
Yes.
I'm glad you said that.
It was going to be a short talk otherwise. So I think there's so many areas that I could choose. In fact, I think we're cooperating internationally together really on everything to do with Antarctica, but to save time, let's just choose a couple of areas. The first one, I think, is on marine conservation, which is very important to both of our countries. And both New Zealand and Argentina have been strong supporters of marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean through the Antarctic Treaty System. New Zealand, with the United States, was a proponent of the Ross Sea marine protected area, which was adopted was adopted in 2016. So I was not there at that point, but I'm sure Fausto was there. Yeah. And of course, Argentina with Chile as a proponent of the Domain 1 Marine Protected Area proposal, which New Zealand also strongly supports. And so maybe we will get some progress on that one this year. We have our fingers crossed. And of course, there's various other marine protection proposals before the Commission as well, which I am also hopeful will be able to move forward this year. So that's one of the areas that we definitely do collaborate on. And I think probably the other one I'll just choose for now is, I guess, our kind of perspective as gateway countries and gateway cities, where I think Antarctica has a slightly different resonance when it's one of your neighbours. And I think that's something that New Zealand and Argentina definitely share. Of course, there are 3 other countries that are gateways as well, and they no doubt have a similar perspective too. But I think, although all the parties to the Antarctic Treaty share the values, I'm sure, of and commitment to protecting the Antarctic environment and to ensuring Antarctica is peaceful. Those things are particularly important when the continent is immediately to your south. Its peaceful nature affects your own peaceful nature, and its environmental protection clearly affects your own environmental protection.
Thank you very much, Alice. Tim, question for you. Science is, of course, at the heart of both nations and all nations' interest in Antarctica, but New Zealand and Argentine scientists typically focus on very different parts of the southern continent, the Ross Dependency and the Antarctic Peninsula. So to what extent do these different areas of focus enable dialogues, and to what extent do they frustrate them? And the related question is, is language a barrier to collaboration, or is science, as they say, a universal language? So your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I guess as Antarctic programs, we do our year-to-year work mostly in our own backyard. So for New Zealand, it's the Ross Sea, and for Argentina, it's the Antarctic Peninsula. But we come together under the international programs that are organised by the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research to really deal with the continental scale differences and also thinking about the shared global issues, such as climate change is obviously a big one that brings us all together. Environmental protection, that's been talked about, super important. And from a climate change point of view, we couldn't be more different. The Antarctic Peninsula is one of the warmest, it's warming the fastest, one of the fastest warming places on the planet. And certainly the fastest warming place in the Antarctic, and the Argentinian base Esperanza has those record temperatures up to 18 degrees Celsius in, I think, 2021. So things are on the change in the Antarctic Peninsula. It also experiences invasions of different species, so it's getting plants that shouldn't really be there, that are there now, and it's a big area of tourism. And I've seen that firsthand, and it's an interesting issue. Whereas when we look at the Ross Sea, we're one of the coolest places. Well, we're pretty cool, but we're also cold. We're one of the coldest places in Antarctica, and we know as paleoclimate scientists who have studied past climates, it's one of the last places that really changes. So we see change happening first in the Antarctic Peninsula, and we see change when it does happen in the Ross Sea, we're in trouble, because usually when the Ross Sea responds, the rest of the continent's underway. So the records we get from the Ross Sea are super important and complementary to the understanding we're developing in the Antarctic Peninsula. And that's where we meet through these international programs and share our different experiences and different knowledge of the continents. So certainly, as the ambassador said, science is the currency that lubricates all that international collaboration and diplomacy, to be honest. I mean, we know in New Zealand, be careful I don't get out of my lane here, Alice, but we know during the times when we didn't have the best relationship with the United States on, say, defence matters, they were always able to talk about Antarctica and the cool things we were doing down there together. And when Secretary Clinton visited, we talked a lot about science. And so Antarctica was a focal point that brought us together on that. I am completely drifting out of my lane. And perhaps I should stop there, Matthew.
Depends how much you drift. Gabriela, why don't you, here's my question to you, as you know, is that the third constituency in Argentina is, of course, the general public, as well as diplomats and scientists, because they or we are the ones who read about melting icebergs or visit Antarctica for tourism. So you're an Argentine living in New Zealand's gateway city from Argentina's gateway city. How have you seen public interest in Antarctica evolve in the two nations over the years? Is it, do they track in common ways, or there are differences between them?
Thank you for the question. The perspective from both countries is different, partially because of the geopolitical instance that both countries have over the Antarctic, but also, just like Tim was saying, the area of interest where we develop our science. And so for Argentina would be the Antarctic Peninsula, which is an area that is not only changing quite rapidly, but also it has a lot of tensions, let's say, with other countries with interest over the same area, rapid environmental changes, a lot of commercial activities with tourism and fishing and so on and so forth. If we look at New Zealand, looking at the Ross Sea, it's very hard not to find someone that will talk to you about Scott Base. In New Zealand. They do know, they are familiar, and it is their backyard. But of course, we have to think about that this is because not only there are policies that are, in a way, shaping that connection with that particular place, but at the same time, the way we finance or we fund all the science that we do in the area. So that has an impact on people and how people see these places and look at these places. From Ushuaia, tourism is very important, and it's important because not only people see the activity, the port of Ushuaia is right in the center of town. And so they can see the ships, they can see the tourists, they can see the international, all the many different languages being spoken at the city. And also the impact that tourism brings when you want to run your errands at the bank or go to your favorite cafe or things like that. That happens with tourism everywhere in the world. And so when you are in a country like Argentina that you have grown thinking about Antarctica as an extension of your country, as a bicontinental country, therefore, these people are visiting your country and you don't have that same choice or that same possibility because it's isolating, it's isolated place, it's very expensive, and it's completely out of the everyday of Argentinians, in particular people from Tierra del Fuego. When you look at New Zealand, we look at Scott Base, we look at the science, we look at how we protect and conserve the Antarctic. But usually we don't relate with the other countries that are doing pretty much the same and thinking along the same lines. So sometimes the connections and the perceptions that people have are a little bit more parochial than what they should be when we're looking at an international continent that has been, as we've heard before, dedicated for peace, for science, international collaboration, and for the benefit of humankind. So there are different perspectives.
That's really interesting. There's a lot we could follow up there, but I'm also conscious that we need to leave time for the audience to ask questions. But just would any of you like to respond to each other's remarks first? Is there any comment that any of you have made that you'd like to pick up on? Tim looks like he wants to.
I have I have a question, I think, for Alice, and I think I've asked it before, so it won't be so hard to answer. We've sort of heard about, the treaty has a few challenges at the moment. The treaty has always endured, and in the first few decades was just fantastic at getting things done. More recently, and this comes back to the ambassador's comment about misinformation and disinformation, it's made science quite difficult within the treaty system as well. And that's the role of SCAR, to be that advisor to the treaty, to be there to provide robust, authoritative, understanding of issues that are policy relevant where science can help. I guess the question, Alice, is do you still see science being impactful with it in the treaty system, or do you think we've been distracted by other issues? And I mean, you're about to go to Kamala, and I know science matters there, so perhaps that's a good example.
I think science is absolutely still the underpinning of all of the decision-making related to Antarctica. So in the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, there's an incredible amount of valuable science that comes from SCAR and from the Antarctic scientists. It's considered by the Committee on Environmental Protection and by the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, and certainly from New Zealand's perspective, and I know Argentina's as well, it's incredibly important that the decisions are based on good science. And likewise in Kamala. It doesn't mean that it makes the decision-making easy, but it would be even harder if we didn't have the good science and sound science on which to base decisions. Yeah.
That was the answer I was hoping.
Phew.
Yeah. One question for each of you. One question which any of you can answer. You don't all have to answer if you don't wish. Fausto talked about signs of hope. He gave us effectively a hopeful message here. Are there any signs of hope out there in terms of how Argentina, New Zealand, or other countries in the system relate to Antarctica, which are not widely known, but which could nevertheless be quite encouraging for us? Or is it generally known, the key issues and positive shoots emerging? I'm loath to say positive shoots emerging, given the greening of the peninsula.
I have a remark that is, in a way, comes as a sideline of your question. So just giving my fellow panelists a little bit of time, buying time to think about an answer. But if we think about all the countries that are now signatories of the treaty, and the fact that we live in this globalized world, that we have misinformation and disinformation, and also we've got in a way, a society that seeks for news in a very shallow way, or just looking at headlines. When we look at who connects with Antarctica, the 18 to 35-year-olds are the ones that are less connecting with the politics of Antarctica, but they're connecting with the science and the issues in Antarctica. So I salute you if you are sitting in the audience, because you are the driving force of what it will be the future of Antarctica. We talk about eco-anxiety in the younger generations, and wouldn't you be anxious about the future, because we're not painting a very hopeful future. However, with the globalized world that we live in, and the fact that we can communicate anywhere in the world just with the tip of our fingers and our mobile phones, this generation is the one that is in a way shaking and shaping the way we need to think about Antarctica and the responsibilities that we have with this place.
Thank you, Gabriela. Tim or Alice, any comments on that? If not, we can move to general questions from the audience, if you wish.
I just had one thought, which was, given the theme of multilateral diplomacy and scientific collaboration, I know a bit more about the multilateral diplomacy side personally, but we've got people here who know about the scientific collaboration too. I just think that it is one of those areas where it tends to attract optimists, and there's always something more that you could be doing, and we've done a lot of the easy things already, so it's understandable that many of the challenges still before us are the hard ones. But every year we come to these meetings and we work together and we make progress, and the fact that so many countries around the world are willing to do that, I think, is something that we should all feel hopeful about.
Well, thank you very much. Well, what I'd like to do now is invite Fausto to take my place here and just come up, and we'll have general questions, if that's possible. And because we're running slightly over time, it's not a problem. Indeed, it's a great thing. We will just have about 5 to 10 minutes of questions. If anyone has a particular question, please put your hand up, say who you are, and ask a question, please, and rather than make a statement. Here's our here we go. So Peter.
I'm International Science. Two questions, two related issues, which I think may either help or complicate matters. We have in 2032-33 the International Polar Year coming up. And that, of course, involves both the Antarctic, the Arctic, and the glacier mountain regions. At the same time, the General Assembly has approved the decade of cryosphere, which has now started and goes for a decade, which is a more political process run by France and Tajikistan. The issue I'm concerned about is, on one hand, with the politics involved in the Arctic and the polar and the mountain regions contaminates good progress that's been made in the Antarctic, or is it going to go the other way? Is the lesson from the Antarctic going to help progress matters on the two other poles, where there's obviously major geostrategic issues, both in the Arctic and particularly in the Himalayan chain and the related mountain chains? Now, I'm heavily involved in both those exercises, and I'm concerned that I'm not sure which way it's going to go. And I think all of us, from our different hats, are going to have to manage what could be a rather complicated expectation between good progress made in the Antarctic and Vietnam. We've got some difficulties which may be precipitated or aggravated by the polar year and by particularly by the decade.
Well, I hope that we, from the south, could influence the north. That's the idea. That's the idea. I hope so. I think that we can do that. And nothing is perfect. I can say that we need to improve a lot of things. But if you see, for example, CAMELR, so NGOs are asking us, you have to do more, you have to do more. We try to do more, yes. But if you see the numbers of overfishing before CAMELR and after CAMELR, what the achievement is incredible. So we need to improve, we will try to improve, we are doing our best to do that, but the numbers without CAMELR and with CAMELR, the difference is dramatic. So there's a really good job done there, and we keep on working. So next week we'll go to Hobart, we'll have a 2-week meeting, really hard meeting, till really late at night. So, but it's not easy. It's not easy to go forward. What we are doing it, and if you see the numbers are fantastic. So, I hope the example of the South could influence the North. Thank you.
Thanks, Sir Peter. The answer to your question is absolutely, we must all meet together. You talk about a decade, the decade for this and the decade for that, and the IPY is so far away. this is the decade of decisions, and the biggest shared, I know you know this, and the biggest shared global issue we have, one of them is climate change. Looking at the cryosphere holistically within that framework is absolutely critical, because it isn't going to be there for that much longer. So I think the answer to your question is we've got to be thinking globally and holistically. And the other thing, what was the other comment? There was something, I've just completely had a mental blank, but it's come back. The thing I worry a little bit with the Antarctic Treaty System is it's a little bit inward looking. And that's great, because it does a lot of really important work in the Southern Ocean and around Antarctica. But what happens in Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica, and it's really important about, to make those connections. So I'm absolutely 100% pleased the IPY is happening like it is. Sorry for my senior moment.
You wanted to say something too?
Yes, I just wanted to add something very little. Not long ago, a few months ago, the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research Conference was held in Pucón in Chile, and we had a session with regards to IPY, and the community actually accepted that because of many of these risks that you have pointed out very nicely, the community has started to work towards that and bring the IPY earlier than expected. So, in order to in a way, be shaped by science rather than politics. In 2007, with the previous IPY, I was a very junior officer in Tierra del Fuego, and I remember the government sending me, because of, I was able to speak in English, and so sending me to some of the meetings. And it was absolutely mesmerizing and also encouraging to see how the science community took on the leading of IPY. And I'm hopeful that this time will happen the same. Yes, there are many scientists that are bipolar in a way, North Pole, South Pole. So hopefully that will be the driving force to avoid the politics that can influence in this. Thank you.
We've got a couple of great quotes we can present tonight. Do we have any other question here, or would you prefer, as a group, to move just to have a more informal conversation with the guests over networking? I'm just looking around to see if there's another one. It looks like people are ready to drink some Argentine wine. Okay. So, thank you, panellists. Thank you very much. Just stay here if you wish while we wrap up. I just want to thank you all for those comments. I thank you as an audience for the comments you're about to make over networking. I think I do like that bipolar comment, and I do like that what happens in Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica. I think we've definitely proved that our two countries have many matters to discuss as we chart a better future for the southern continent. Just final remarks. As I signalled when I started this event, our CAPE is about to wrap up. So this is it's actually the second to last public gathering we'll convene. So I do want to thank our embassy, our event partners, the Embassy of Argentina and the Antarctic Research Centre, for making it a lively and enjoyable one. I also want to thank those of you who have been our partners in other events and who are unable to attend our farewell event for the great work we've done together. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to work with you. And when a future politician gets the idea to support something like a CAPE, we hope that you come along and support it as well as you've worked with us. But for now, I think it's time to celebrate this relationship, this event, over some networking. So please, when we leave the room, you can either leave at the back if you're at the back, because it's on the floor up, the networking, I love the Antarctic tents I see up there, or you can come out this way. Both ways are good. We look forward to seeing you there and to getting to know you. And thank you all for coming. Please join me in thanking our special guests from our panel.